Welcome to today's deep dive. I want you to think back for a second to, well, the era of VHS and audio cassettes.
Oh, man. Showing our age a bit here.
Right, I know, I know. But before everything went perfectly digital, recording was this brutally physical
Yeah,
process.
you had that long strip of plastic.
Exactly, coated in those tiny particles of iron oxide. And if you wanted to record like a new song off the radio, the machine had to generate a magnetic field to physically scramble and realign those iron particles over whatever was already on that tape.
Right, which worked most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah. But if the old recording was incredibly loud or if the magnetic tape was just worn down in just the right way, the new song wouldn't completely erase the old one.
You get that weird bleed-through effect.
Exactly. You'd end up hearing this faint, ghostly echo of the original track bleeding through. The physical medium itself simply couldn't forget the intense energy that had been imprinted on it.
That's a highly specific physical mechanic, but it actually serves as a really brilliant conceptual framework for what we are looking at today.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely, because you're basically describing a physical medium retaining the structural memory of a past event, even when, new layers of reality are continuously being schooled right on top of it.
Right. And for today's deep dive, I want you to hold on to that image of the overloaded, bleeding cassette tape. Because our mission today is to take the stack of sources we've gathered and head straight into the shadows of the Adirondacks.
Yeah, a beautiful area, but with some seriously dark corners.
Very dark. Specifically, we are examining Fort William Henry, which is located right on the southern end of Lake George in New York.
Right.
And we're going to explore how the incredibly heavy, violent history of an 18th century conflict supposedly still manifests in that exact physical space today.
Because according to the accounts, the historical records, and the paranormal investigations we're pulling from, this isn't just a static historic landmark for tourists.
No, not at all. It's a site where the boundary between the past and the present is reported to be paper thin.
Yeah, the underlying claim in these sources isn't just that history happened here. It's the idea that a location is not just a set of geographical coordinates, right? It's a literal container for human experience.
Which makes you wonder, what if the stone walls and the bedrock of a military fort act as a giant geological recorded device?
Like the cassette tape.
Exactly like the tape. What if extreme human emotion, terror, rage, absolute sorrow somehow gets taped over the environment? The theory suggests that this emotional energy just sinks into the limestone and the soil and then sits there totally dormant,
Just waiting.
waiting for the right person or the exact right atmospheric conditions to hit play.
Right, and what you're describing is actually what paranormal researchers call the stone tape theory.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, so it's the hypothesis that traumatic events generate such a massive spike in human bioelectrical energy that it physically alters the surrounding environment. Yeah, proponents argue that materials like quartz, limestone, and bedrock, which, by the way, are abundant in the geology of the Lake George region, can act like the iron oxide on your cassette tape.
So they basically absorb and store the energetic signature of extreme trauma.
Exactly. And when you look at the documented history of Fort William Henry, you are looking at an environment subjected to a truly unfathomable concentration of trauma.
Which means before we can even begin to understand the ghosts of today, we really have to unpack the immense trauma that birthed them.
We have to lay down the historical bedrock.
Right. So let's look at the bedrock of this story. We are talking about the French and Indian War. Specifically, our sources point to the catastrophic events of August 1757.
A really brutal time.
And we need to be clear about what actually happened, because this wasn't just two armies lining up in a field shooting muskets and shaking hands at the end of the day.
No, not at all. 1757 is the inescapable center of gravity for this entire site. You had a British and provincial garrison at Fort William Henry enduring a brutal multi-day siege.
By a much larger French force, right?
Right, under General Montcalm. And the fort was bombarded until the walls were literally crumbling. The British commander, Monroe, eventually had absolutely no choice but to surrender.
But the surrender itself isn't the trauma, it's what happened immediately after that.
Right.
Because the French offered terms of safe passage, the British garrison, along with their families, and this is crucial, there were hundreds of women, children, and camp followers inside that fort. They were told they could march away safely to Fort Edward.
And that promise of safe passage, that's the pivot point of the whole tragedy, because Montcalm's Native American allies felt completely cheated by this surrender agreement. They had fought for the spoils of war, which was totally customary for them, and the French just denied them that.
So they took matters into their own hands.
Exactly. As the vulnerable column of British soldiers and civilians marched out of the fort, the native forces attacked. The column just broke down into sheer chaos.
People were pulled from the ranks, killed, or taken captive. I mean, it was an absolute massacre.
It was horrific.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because Europe and America are absolutely covered in old battlefields.
Well, for sure. Thousands of them.
Right. People fought and died on thousands of hills and in thousands of fields that today are just, quiet public parks or peaceful suburban neighborhoods.
You never even know.
Exactly. I can walk my dog over a Revolutionary War skirmish site and feel absolutely nothing. So what is it about the specific flavor of violence in 1757 at this fort that supposedly makes the past refuse to leave?
That's a great question. And it really comes down to a collision of concentration and expectation.
Okay, explain that.
Well, a traditional battlefield is an open, sprawling space. Soldiers march onto it with the explicit expectation of combat.
Right. They know what they're walking into.
Right. The violence is horrific, obviously, but it is anticipated. A fort under siege, however, especially one packed with civilians seeking refuge, that is a space where the fundamental expectation of safety is violently shattered.
Oh, I see.
You have this confined, incredibly claustrophobic footprint. So when the massacre occurred, the emotional output wasn't just the adrenaline of combat. It was profound betrayal, absolute panic, and sheer desperation.
It's the sudden breaking of the rules. They thought they were safe. I mean, they had the signed surrender terms right there.
Exactly. That sudden transition from perceived salvation to horrific slaughter creates an incredibly concentrated burst of trauma.
Wow.
If we entertain the stone tape theory, that localized epicenter of sudden, massive human suffering is the exact recipe for a permanent, energetic scar.
And that concentrated footprint brings us to the most visceral, aggressive example of that lingering unrest reported at the fort today. We really need to talk about the entity down in the casement.
Oh, yeah. The sources across the board simply refer to him as him.
Just him. And the lack of a name actually makes the reports more intimidating, honestly.
It definitely carries a lot of weight.
And a frankly terrifying amount of anger. Visitors and staff report constant encounters with this intensely aggressive presence down in the casement. And for those trying to picture this, a casement isn't just like a basement.
No, it's not somewhere you store your old boxes.
Right. It's a fortified, vaulted stone chamber built right into the thick outer walls of the fort. It was designed to withstand heavy artillery fire, but in a siege, it essentially becomes this claustrophobic, dark trap.
Basically a heavily reinforced echo chamber.
Exactly. And the symptoms of the encounters in this space are not subtle at all. We're not talking about someone just getting a weird feeling in their stomach.
No, these are physical manifestations.
Yeah. The reports detail sudden, freezing cold spots that drop the ambient temperature by 10 degrees in a second. They describe heavy, solid wood doors slamming shut on their own with massive force.
Which take a lot of effort to move even normally.
Right. And most terrifyingly, they describe an unseen force that physically pushes or actually scratches the people who go down there.
But the sources highlight a very specific trigger for that physical violence. It's important to note the entity doesn't just attack randomly.
No, the reports say him specifically targets those who show disrespect, like someone mocking the history or laughing too loudly or actively provoking the space.
And this raises an incredibly important point about the psychology of this manifestation. If we analyze the reactive nature of this entity, it isn't just some random burst of chaotic poltergeist energy.
Right.
By specifically targeting those who show disrespect, this haunting is directly mirroring the rigid, honor-bound, and highly violent reality of an 18th century military environment.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, in 1757, disrespect from a subordinate or an outsider in a military fortification would be met with immediate physical punishment.
So it's highly structured aggression. I kind of picture it like a spectral bouncer.
A good way to put it.
You know, you have this soldier who hasn't realized his tour of duty ended literal centuries ago. He is actively policing these modern-day tourists who wander into his barracks wearing shorts and holding smartphones.
Right. To him, they are out of uniform, they're out of line, and they need to be taught a lesson.
But wait, I'm struggling with a massive contradiction here.
Okay, where's the disconnect?
Well, you just walked us through the stone tape theory, the idea that the bedrock is just replaying a static geological recording of past trauma. But in the casement, him is actively reacting to modern tourists being disrespectful.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, like a cassette tape doesn't change its song just because I yell at my radio. It just plays. So how do the paranormal sources reconcile a highly interactive entity with a static environmental recording?
That is the exact friction point where the source material actually fractures.
Hmm.
Paranormal investigators divide these phenomena into two distinct categories: residual hauntings and intelligent hauntings.
Oh.
The stone tape theory explains residual hauntings. The tape just plays blindly, regardless of who is in the room. But the entity in the casement is classified by many investigators as an intelligent haunting.
Meaning it's aware.
Yes, it implies a consciousness that is aware of its surroundings, still bound by the military rules of the era in which it died, and making conscious decisions to assert authority.
So it's not a recording, it's a trapped consciousness.
Well, some sources argue that. However, others tried to bridge the gap by suggesting the environmental trigger, like the loud noise or the mocking tone of a tourist, acts like an acoustic key.
An acoustic key.
Yeah, it hits a certain frequency of disruption that causes the tape to forcefully eject its stored energy, manifesting as a sudden drop in temperature or a violent physical release, like a door slamming.
Wow, it's a fascinating debate. But either way, it results in a heavy, dark, incredibly masculine energy. It's violent.
Very much so.
But our sources provide a stark, almost jarring contrast to this, because just outside the fort's inner walls, away from the casement, there is a completely different manifestation.
Right, the entity near the well.
Yes, the little girl at the well. It is the diametric opposite of the aggressive soldier.
Yeah, the vibe is totally different.
Completely. People report hearing a faint child's voice, or they catch a glimpse of a small figure dressed in period clothing lingering near the fort's well area. And the sources are careful to point out that the entire energy of this encounter shifts drastically.
It's not aggressive.
No, her presence doesn't feel territorial or angry at all. It feels overwhelmingly sorrowful. It feels deeply, tragically lost.
And if we connect this back to the history we established earlier, the massacre following the siege, this makes agonizing sense.
Right, the civilians.
Exactly. We noted that the victims of 1757 included hundreds of civilians and families caught in the crossfire of the marching column. This little girl serves as a personalized manifestation of that collateral damage.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. When you say the word fort to anyone, the immediate image that pops into their head is soldiers.
Men in uniform with muskets standing on a wall.
Exactly. But the very existence of this little girl's ghost in the local lore forces us to completely rethink the reality of who actually lived, suffered, and died inside those stone walls.
It shatters the modern misconception of historical warfare. A military fort in the 18th century, especially on the frontier like Lake George, was essentially a small, self-contained town.
Yeah, it wasn't just troops.
Not at all. You had the soldiers, yes, but you also had camp followers, the wives and children of the enlisted men. You had local merchants, tradespeople, and refugees from the surrounding wilderness seeking shelter when the French army approached. It was a complex community.
And when the walls fall, the entire community pays the price.
Exactly.
But let's elevate this for a second. Let's look at the people reporting this today, because I think there is a deep sociological reason why the story of the little girl is so prominent in the fort's modern mythology.
Oh, definitely.
When you tell a tourist that hundreds of people died in a massacre, that is a massive, unfathomable data point. The human brain really struggles to process statistics of mass death.
It's too big to grasp.
Right. But a lost, weeping little girl looking for her family.
That is a highly specific, deeply relatable human tragedy.
Exactly. We want to believe in her because she humanizes the history. She puts a face on a footnote. She gives us a focal point for our empathy. We can't mourn a statistic, but we can mourn a lost child.
And that empathy is a crucial factor here. She isn't asserting military authority like the soldier in the casement. She is simply echoing the trauma of being violently separated from her life and her safety.
Yeah.
And the well, as a location, is highly symbolic. In a siege, a well is the ultimate lifeline for a trapped community. To have her spirit bound to the source of water emphasizes that sheer desperation for survival.
So you have these two intense, diametrically opposed emotional imprints. The aggressive, territorial soldier demanding respect in the dark, and the weeping child wandering near the well.
Two sides of the same tragic coin.
Exactly. But what happens when you take modern tourists with all their own psychological baggage and expectations and place them right in the middle of that crossfire? Because the fort today isn't just a passive pile of ruins.
No, The modern iteration of Fort William Henry is highly unique.
Hmm.
It is a fully reconstructed fort.
Right. It's a historic landmark operating in 2026, and it actively embraces this dark history by hosting public haunted history tours.
Which is an experience in itself.
And the sensory details our sources provide about these quiet nights at the fort are incredibly evocative. People report hearing heavy footsteps pacing along the empty bastions, which, by the way, are those projecting angular defensive walls that stick out from the corners of the fort.
Right.
They describe unexplained whispers echoing in the powder magazine where the explosives were kept. And above all, they describe this undeniable, suffocating sense that you are just not entirely alone out there in the dark.
This is where the psychology of the modern visitor directly intersects with the architecture of the site.
Okay, how so?
What's fascinating here is how the physical reconstruction of the fort acts as a psychological bridge. The original 1757 fort was largely destroyed and burned by the French after the massacre.
Right, they leveled it.
But by rebuilding it in the 1950s, by recreating the bastions, the casements, and the powder magazine directly on top of the original foundation footprint, they effectively recreated the exact spatial geometry of the trauma.
Wow. It's almost like wearing a historical VR headset.
That's a great analogy.
Like, your logical brain knows it's the modern day, but the towering wooden walls and stone architecture around you are feeding your nervous system's sensory data from 1757. It's tricking your body into feeling the claustrophobia and vulnerability of a siege.
And that spatial alignment is a really powerful psychological trigger. When you walk those bastions today, your body is occupying the exact same physical space with the exact same sight lines into the dark woods as the people who anticipated that horrific attack.
It's eerie.
It is. The architecture itself cues your brain to feel isolated and confined.
And that brings up a really important scientific concept when we talk about the whispers in the powder magazine. We have to talk about pareidolia.
Ah, yes. The brain's tendency to impose meaningful patterns on random stimuli.
Exactly. You walk into a powder magazine, which is a dark, heavily reinforced underground bunker designed to keep gunpowder dry. It is acoustically bizarre.
The echoes must be intense.
Oh, yeah. The wind whistling through heavy wooden doors, the shitching of stones, the distant sound of water from Lake George. All of this creates random acoustic noise.
Right.
And what does the human brain do when it's placed in a scary environment and fed random noise? It actively searches for a threat.
It wants to keep you safe.
Exactly. It takes the sound of the wind and translates it into a human whisper. It takes a creaking board and translates it into a heavy military footstep.
The power of suggestion, especially on a haunted history tour, really primes the brain to experience pareidolia. If a tour guide tells you that a space is haunted by an aggressive soldier, your nervous system goes on high alert.
Every shadow is a threat.
Right. Every draft of cold air becomes evidence of him. The internal expectation dictates the external experience.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I want you to really think about this. If you were to drive up into the Adirondacks, get a ticket, and walk those empty bastions tonight, what do you think is actually happening out there?
It's the ultimate question.
When you hear a heavy footstep behind you or feel the temperature suddenly plummet in the stone casement, do you think you'd be experiencing a genuine supernatural entity? Are you interacting with the bioelectrical residue of a 1757 massacre imprinted on the limestone? Or are you just feeling the immense, crushing psychological weight of history playing tricks on your mind?
It is the ultimate unresolved question of places like this. Is the haunting external, genuinely residing in the crystalline structure of the stones and the soil?
Right.
Or is it entirely internal, residing in our empathetic, deeply human response to knowing the horrific things that happened right where our feet are planted?
Basically, is the cassette tape actually playing a ghost song? Or are we just remembering the lyrics so vividly that our brains trick us into thinking we hear it?
Well, it's a false binary to assume one completely invalidates the other.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The specific, unprovoked physical scratches, the localized temperature drops that totally defy the ambient weather, the distinct, sorrowful presence of the little girl reported by people who don't even know the history.
Right, the stuff that's harder to explain away?
Exactly. These patterns suggest something that occasionally bypasses mere suggestion. But understanding a place like this means holding both possibilities in your mind at once.
You have to have a balanced view.
You do. You have to recognize the profound psychological impact of standing on a site of mass trauma, while remaining entirely open to the possibility that human emotion, when pushed to its absolute breaking point, might permanently scar the physical world.
And we are looking at a location where the profound pain of 1757 absolutely refuses to be paved over or forgotten. I mean, it has etched itself into the very identity of Lake George.
It's part of the landscape now.
It is. We see it captured in the violent, territorial scratches of the soldier in the casement, aggressively holding the line against the passage of time. And we see it in the wandering, sorrowful cries of the little girl by the well, perfectly freezing the tragedy of a community caught in the crossfire.
The past and the present are simply sharing the same real estate. The walls haven't stopped listening.
And that brings us right back to our tape recorder. We've spent this entire deep dive looking backward, examining how the sheer volume of fear and anger from an 18th century war might have permanently imprinted itself onto the stone and soil of the Adirondacks. But I want to leave you with the thought that turns this entire concept around. Think about your own life. Think about your home, your office, the streets you walk down every single day. If extreme emotions like the territorial anger of a soldier and the profound sorrow of a lost child can truly imprint themselves onto physical space and echo for centuries, what everyday emotional imprints are we unknowingly leaving behind in the places we live and work right now, just waiting to become a ghost story for someone hundreds of years in the future?